Allow me to invite you to an unlearning exercise, a conscious dismantling of ingrained perceptions. I ask you, for a moment, to set aside everything you think you know, everything you've been told, whispered, or even shouted about cannabis. Forget the simplistic labels that attempt to cage its essence, the hasty judgments born from fear or fleeting euphoria, and the prefabricated narratives spun by commerce or counterculture. Because what we have before us is not merely a plant, a simple botanical specimen tumble under the sun, catalogued by science and cultivated for its psychoactive properties. No, it is something infinitely more complex, more profound, more demanding of our respect. It is a direct interpellation to your being, a rigorous examination of the soul, a spiritual litmus test, and if we are brutally honest, stripping away all self-deception. It is a test that the vast majority of people, in their haste for sensation and their superficial engagement, are failing miserably, often without even realizing the depth of the examination they have stumbled into. You have undoubtedly been incessantly bombarded from every conceivable angle by a barrage of reductionist definitions, each more limited and misleading than the last. We are told, with unwavering certainty by opposing camps, that marijuana is either a miraculous panacea capable of curing all ills, a veritable elixir of life, or a destructive menace that corrodes the social fabric, unravels the individual mind, and leads to ruin. It is presented, with wide-eyed wonder, as a mystical portal to unsuspected dimensions of enlightenment, a chemical key to cosmic consciousness, or conversely with stern condemnation, as a simple and lazy escape route from a reality that we find uncomfortable, challenging, or overwhelming. It is venerated by some as a sacred herb, a gift from a benevolent divinity, a direct line to the spiritual realm, or it is condemned by others as a sinful indulgence, a vice that distances us from virtue, reason, and responsibility. The list of these stark dichotomies is endless, each painting a black and white picture, a caricature of a reality that is, in essence, an infinite spectrum of nuances, a complex interplay of chemistry, consciousness, and context. But here is the raw and luminous truth. A truth that cuts through the deafening noise of opposing opinions and entrenched prejudices with the force and precision of a surgeon's scalpel. None of these small and convenient conceptual boxes, however orderly or reassuring they may seem to our pattern-seeking minds, even begin to touch the periphery of the essence of what this plant truly represents in its unfathomable complexity and its ancient, challenging wisdom. Cannabis, my friend, does not bend to your preconceived notions. It does not submit meekly to your casual desires or your superficial expectations. It is not a passive substance waiting to be molded by your whims. Instead, it acts with the precision and power of a formidable sound amplifier, or perhaps more accurately, a psychic resonator. It takes whatever already resides in the unfathomable depths of your soul, your most hidden fears that whisper insidious doubts, your purest longings that yearn for expression, your unresolved traumas that cast long shadows, your brightest potentials that lie dormant like sleeping giants, and raises its volume, its intensity, its undeniable presence, until it becomes deafening, inescapable, demanding your full attention. And it is precisely this quality of indiscriminate, impartial amplification, this uncanny ability to magnify without prior judgment or preference, whatever already exists within you, that makes it a tool of such incredibly transformative power and, for many, so dangerous, misunderstood, and carelessly wielded. It is a double-edged sword of immense potency. It can illuminate the darkest, most cobwebbed corners of your psyche, revealing hidden treasures of self-knowledge, repressed memories, and forgotten strength, or it can plunge you headfirst into a terrifying whirlwind of confusion, anxiety, and anguish. If what it finds simmering in your interior is unresolved chaos, emotional turmoil, or a deeply fractured sense of self, it does not create, it reveals. It does not invent, it exposes. In the sacred traditions of ancient civilizations, those cultures that wove the first intricate threads of human consciousness and explored the mysteries of existence with a depth we have largely forgotten, cannabis was never considered a trivial pastime to kill dead hours or to merely adorn moments of leisure with a pleasant buzz. It was not a simple distraction from the burdens of life, nor a mere social lubricant. It was conceived with awe and reverence as a sacred portal, a formidable tool for transformation, an instrument of spiritual precision that was wielded only by those individuals brave enough, upright enough in character, and sufficiently prepared through discipline and purification to confront the entirety of their being, the light and the shadow, the beautiful and the terrifying, without filters, without distractions, without easy escape routes or comforting self-deceptions. Shamans, mystics, visionaries, dedicated seekers of truth, and initiated priests and priestesses did not use it to decorate their egos, to inflate their personalities with a false sense of profundity, or to escape from their worldly responsibilities and karmic lessons. On the contrary, they employed it as a sacred, almost surgical instrument, with the deliberate and focused purpose of dissolving the ego itself, or at least loosening its tyrannical grip, of peeling away, one by one, the layers of illusion, self-imposed, socially constructed, and culturally inherited, in order to meet face to face with their rawest, most authentic self, without adornments, without varnishes, in a state of naked truth. Now, let us fast forward in time, hurtling from those dawns of meticulous consciousness to our dizzying, hyper-stimulated present, and the landscape, the cultural understanding and usage of this plant could not be more devastatingly different, more tragically trivialized. This plant, once revered, zealously guarded, and approached with trepidation and respect, has become omnipresent, almost banal in its ubiquity. It is sold with the same casualness with which one acquires a candy bar in a sweet shop or a cheap trinket online, its sacredness stripped away by commercial packaging and marketing slogans. It is smoked as if it were the latest fleeting trend of a passing fad, a mere accessory to a certain lifestyle, devoid of any deeper significance. And even, in some circles, it is worshipped with a kind of blind faith, as the central pillar of an identity, a prefabricated personality built around its consumption. What was once a profound, deeply intentional ritual, a carefully orchestrated act of communion with the divine, with nature and with oneself, has degenerated in many quarters into a mindless mechanical routine, an automatic gesture, empty of its original soul, its transformative potential largely ignored or untapped. The sacred, in an act of grotesque and almost unbelievable transmutation, has been transformed into a mere spectacle, into another consumer product within the vast, insatiable market of fleeting experiences and instant gratification. This is not, let me clarify with utmost emphasis, a simplistic debate about whether cannabis is intrinsically good or intrinsically bad. That is a sterile, dualistic discussion that distances us from the core of the matter, a red herring that distracts from the real questions. This is about something infinitely more critical, more personal, more existentially significant. It is about understanding what this powerful plant, with its undeniable capacity for profound amplification and stark revelation, is truly doing to the very fabric of your soul, to the most intimate structure of your being, to your journey of consciousness. And, what is even more important, it is about whether you are genuinely prepared for that encounter, for that unveiled, unmediated confrontation with your own interiority, with all its hidden complexities and uncomfortable truths. Are you ready to meet yourself, truly, without the usual buffers and defenses? Long before cannabis was casually rolled into a machine-made joint or commercially packaged in slick branded containers for profit, long before it became a symbol of youthful rebellion, a countercultural icon, or a fashion accessory, it was revered as a sacred key, a potent opener of doors within the psyche. A key that was handled with the utmost care, with profound reverence, born of deep understanding, and that was entrusted only to those who possessed the necessary wisdom, the inner stability, and the ethical maturity to understand what profound and transcendental doors they were on the verge of opening, what powerful forces they were about to invoke, what thresholds of perception they were about to cross. The unprepared were not invited to this sacred dance. In the very dawn of civilization, as humanity began to weave the first tapestries of culture, myth, and spirituality, this plant was never perceived as a simple recreational pastime, as a form of light entertainment to while away the hours. It was a consecrated tool, a potent psychoactive substance, intrinsically aligned with the subtle rhythms of the spirit, with the invisible currents of energy that animate the cosmos and flow through all living beings. Its use was strictly confined, in most cultures that held it sacred, to the hallowed context of profound rituals, often involving disciplined fasts that purified the body and heightened sensory awareness, heartfelt prayers and invocations that aligned the intention with higher purposes, periods of transformative solitude that allowed for deep introspection and communion with the transcendent, and often the guidance of experienced elders or shamans who knew how to navigate the altered states and integrate the experiences. Imagine for a moment ancient India, the cradle of millennia-old philosophies and spiritualities that have shaped human thought for eons. There, cannabis, known by various names such as bhang, ganja, or charas, was considered a sacred offering to Shiva, the formidable god of destruction and transformation, the divine ascetic, the lord of yogis, the deity who dissolves all illusions, all attachments, all outdated forms, so that unadulterated truth, pure consciousness, can finally be born and manifest in its full glory. His devoted followers, the Sadhuas, those wandering ascetics with matted hair, ash-smeared bodies, and piercing otherworldly gazes, did not smoke for mere amusement, to dull their senses, or to relieve the tedium of their austere lives. They engaged in this ritual, often in groups around a sacred fire, with the symbolic intention of dying to their ego, of transcending the mundane, limited and illusory self, in order to merge, even if momentarily, with the vast formless cosmic consciousness that Shiva represents. The chillum, the conical clay pipe they held in their hands, often passed from one to another in a circle of shared intention, was not a fashionable accessory or a sign of belonging to a particular subculture. It was a sacrament, a direct conduit to the divine, an instrument for inner alchemy, a tool to facilitate the journey from the personal to the transpersonal. The smoke itself was seen as carrying prayers and intentions upwards. This profound reverence for the transformative and sometimes challenging potential of the plant resonated across diverse cultures and geographies, each adapting its use to their unique cosmological understanding. In the sophisticated and often highly secret practices of Taoist alchemy in ancient China, cannabis, sometimes referred to as ma fin tem fin, meaning hemp powder, or cannabis, was meticulously blended with other potent herbs like ginseng or datura, not with the aim of dulling the senses or inducing a state of mere stupor or forgetfulness. The purpose was far more refined, to purify and circulate the vital life energy. The key is to cultivate a profound inner silence and stillness that allowed the practitioner to hear the subtle voice of the Tao, the underlying harmony of the universe, and to trigger visionary dreams and journeys into other realms of consciousness that offered glimpses beyond the veil of ordinary consensus reality. It was not employed to numb everyday perceptions, but to awaken a far more subtle, heightened awareness, a capacity to perceive the energetic underpinnings of existence. Ancient texts eloquently describe it as a spirit communicating plant or a soul guiding her, a powerful entity capable of either sharpening insight to a razor's edge, facilitating communication with spirits or ancestors, or conversely of dangerously unbalancing one's vital life force. The key and even damaging the Shin, spirit-mind, depending entirely on the user's inner alignment, purity of intention, and level of spiritual preparedness. For the unprepared, the uninitiated, or those with a weak constitution or scattered mind, it was never considered a gift to be taken lightly, but a formidable test, a challenging ordeal that could lead to profound enlightenment or to debilitating confusion and psychic disruption. Sufi mystics, those ecstatic poets, dancers, and lovers of God within the Islamic tradition, who sought the direct experiential union, Tawheed, with the divine, also, in some orders and historical periods, incorporated hashish, a resinous form of cannabis, into their sacred ceremonies, particularly in their summer gatherings involving music, chant, and whirling dance. They did so with the fervent intention of dissolving the individual self, the nafs, ego or lower self, into the overwhelming, all-encompassing, and loving presence of the divine, of experiencing faina, the annihilation of the limited ego in the boundless ocean of the one reality. However, even among these seasoned spiritual explorers, individuals often deeply versed in the arts of introspection, meditation, and spiritual discipline, the plant remained a controversial subject, a double-edged sword that required extreme caution and was not universally accepted. The great poet and mystic Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi, one of the most luminous voices of Sufism, whose words have inspired millions across centuries, himself issued stern warnings about the kind of intoxication that merely imitates true spiritual awakening, that which produces pleasant sensations, feelings of expansion, or even apparent mystical insights, but leaves the soul, the core of one's being, tragically untouched, unenlightened, untransformed in its fundamental egocentric structure. The plant was only truly revered and considered beneficial when its use, guided by a master and within a sacred container, led to the genuine annihilation or significant humbling of the ego, not to its subtle and deceptive amplification, not to an aggrandizement disguised as spiritual attainment or humility. It had to be wielded with the respect, precision, and skill of a master swordsman, lest it cut the very hand that presumed to hold it, or worse, damage the delicate fabric of the soul. Among the Rastafarians of Jamaica, cannabis, or ganja as they reverently call it, is celebrated as the herb of wisdom, the holy herb, the very healing of the nations, prophesied in the Book of Revelation. But its use for the devout Rasta is far from casual or merely recreational in the Western, hedonistic sense. It is deeply interwoven with prayer, with the chanting of psalms, with meditation, nyabangi, which involves drumming and chanting to invoke the presence of Jah, and is centrally introduced into reasoning sessions. These are communal gatherings where the chalice, a water pattern made from a coconut shell, is passed, and words, ideas, and interpretations of scripture and life events are shared and debated with the aim of achieving a collective and sincere search for truth, justice, understanding, and overstanding, a deeper, more intuitive comprehension. It functions as a tool for profound communion, both with Jah, God, and with the brothers and sisters, brethren and sistren of the community, not as a cowardly escape route from the problems and injustices of Babylon, the oppressive, materialistic Western world. Its use is never divorced from its liturgical, spiritual, and communal context. In those sacred circles, often held outdoors under the stars, cannabis is not consumed to forget the world's troubles, but to remember the divine spark that resides within it and within each participant, to strengthen the connection with the sacred, to gain clarity on social and spiritual issues, and to inspire righteous actions and a commitment to liberty, a conscious, natural, and upright way of life. And yet here we are in the contemporary West, and increasingly in other parts of the world influenced by its cultural exports, having largely transformed this profound sacrament, this ancient tool of consciousness, into a trivial souvenir, a fleeting sensation, another product in the vast emporium of consumer culture. What once demanded rigorous preparation, physical purification through diet and fasting, mental centering through meditation and prayer, spiritual alignment through intention and ritual, now demands absolutely nothing beyond the ability to purchase it. You can acquire marijuana in a brightly lit sterile dispensary with the same impersonal ease with which you order fast food at a drive-through window or click add to cart online. You can casually light a joint between sending text messages, checking social media notifications, and planning your next consumer purchase. You can mindlessly scroll through an endless, algorithmically curated feed of meaningless digital content, a deluge of superficial images and sound bites, while floating in a synthetically induced calm, an artificial peace that often masks a profound disconnection from oneself, from others, and from the natural world. The plant itself, in its botanical essence, remains unchanged. Its ancient power, its complex array of cannabinoids and terpenes, its ability to amplify and reveal, remains intact, latent in its resinous trichomes, waiting to be engaged. But the context surrounding its use, the cultural and spiritual vessel that once gave it shape, meaning, and direction, has been completely, almost systematically desecrated, emptied of its transcendent significance, and replaced by a void of shallow consumerism. And when cannabis is stripped of its ritualistic container, when it is torn from the sacred ground of intention, preparation, and ceremony, it inevitably loses its compass, its spiritual direction, its potential for profound positive transformation. When the sacred ceremony disappears, when the guiding wisdom of tradition is discarded, all that remains for many is raw sensation, the naked, unmediated sensory experience, often overwhelming and confusing, and sensation without purpose, without guidance, without a framework of understanding to give it meaning and integrate it into a larger whole, invariably degenerates into mere indulgence, into a hollow pursuit of fleeting pleasure, into a repetitive cycle of seeking and temporary satiation that leads to no real transformation, no lasting growth, only to a dulled sensitivity and a potential for dependence. The inherent danger here does not lie, as many naively suppose, solely within the plant itself, in its chemical composition or its psychoactive effects. It resides rather, and perhaps more significantly, in our modern audacity, in our cultural arrogance and spiritual illiteracy that leads us to relate to something that was once considered profoundly sacred, a veritable arcanium of nature, as if it was simply another form of cheap entertainment, another item on the ever-expanding menu of available distractions and mood-altering substances. Cannabis does not offer a predictable and consistent experience, like a precisely measured dose of a pharmaceutical drug, or even like a familiar cup of coffee or a glass of wine. It is not a simple switch that reliably turns certain sensations on or off. It offers, as we have emphasized, potent, indiscriminate amplification. If you approach it well anchored, centered in your being, with a clear conscious intention, a humble heart, and a prepared mind, it can indeed deepen your connection with yourself, with the subtle energies of others, and with the vast mysterious intelligence of the universe around you. It can open you to astonishing new perspectives, to profound creative insights, to deeper understandings of your own life's patterns and purpose. However, if you are lost, disoriented, adrift in a sea of internal confusion and unresolved emotional baggage, if your soul is a neglected garden choked with the weeds of fear, resentment, and self-doubt, it will only magnify the bewildering, terrifying labyrinth of your own confusion. You will get even more lost in the dark, winding corridors of your mind, and the experience, far from being liberating or enlightening, will become a source of greater anguish, paranoia, and existential unease. Most people, tragically, in our desacralized modern world do not even realize that they are stumbling, often with a flippant or purely hedonistic attitude, into what was once considered a sacred temple, a space of profound spiritual potential, with muddy, disrespectful feet and a heart unprepared for the encounter. They enter seeking a quick fix, a momentary escape, a chemical shortcut to happiness or creativity, a magic pill for their existential ailments, and then they wonder, with genuine and often pained perplexity, why their experience is filled only with distorted shadows, unsettling echoes from their subconscious, a pervasive sense of emptiness, or a gnawing anxiety that the plant itself seems to exacerbate rather than alleviate. They blame the plant, the strain, the set and setting, rarely looking to the unpreparedness of their own inner vessel. There are certainly layers upon layers, strata upon strata of understanding about cannabis that have been discovered, meticulously preserved and cautiously transmitted within the Hermetic, Gnostic, alchemical and mystical traditions throughout the centuries, across diverse cultures. These are profound insights, subtle knowledges, often encoded in symbol and allegory, that may be too nuanced, too challenging, or too easily misunderstood for a brief overview like this, but that are absolutely vital for a true, holistic comprehension of its vast potential and its equally significant perils. The unvarnished truth, the one that is often avoided for its starkness and its demand for personal responsibility, is that the plant does not arbitrarily decide where it will take you. It does not possess a personal agenda for your enlightenment or your perdition. It is not a benevolent guide that will gently lead you by the hand to spiritual bliss, nor a malevolent trickster seeking to ensnare you, though it can certainly feel like either depending on your inner state. It simply and often brutally holds up a mirror to your soul, a flawless, unforgiving, high-definition mirror. And that mirror, relentless in its crystalline honesty, reflects absolutely everything that resides within you at that moment of encounter, your deepest and most ingrained fears, those primal anxieties that lurk in the shadowy basements of your subconscious, often inherited or absorbed in early life, your unresolved emotional pain, the accumulated grief, anger, shame, and sorrow from past wounds that you thought you had successfully buried or moved on from, but that continue to fester and exert a hidden influence on your present, your unasked, or perhaps unanswerable, existential questions. those profound angoisse about meaning, purpose, mortality, and your place in the cosmos, that gnaw at your peace of mind in quiet moments, and your hidden anxieties, the subtle everyday worries and insecurities that you might normally manage to suppress or ignore through busyness and distraction. This mirror does not care about your carefully constructed vibe of the moment, your superficial intentions to just chill or have fun. It cares only about the unadulterated truth of your inner state, the raw, unfiltered essence of your being at that precise, unveiled instant. You cannot deceive it with positive affirmations. If your depths are turbulent, you cannot hide from its penetrating gaze. This is precisely why in most authentic traditions that employed master plans or other powerful consciousness-altering techniques, the preparation itself was not merely a preliminary step, but the crucial ritual, the true spiritual work, the foundation upon which a meaningful experience could be built. It was not a simple preamble, a perfunctory gesture, but the very heart of the practice. This preparation often involved disciplined fasts that purified the physical body of toxins, lightened the energetic load, and sharpened sensory and psychic sensitivity. Sacred chants, mantras, or prayers that tuned the energetic vibration of the individual and the space, calmed the discursive mind, and invoked protective and guiding spiritual forces. Periods of profound silence and solitude that allowed the seeker to hear the subtle voice of their own intuition and to quiet the incessant noise of the external world and the internal monkey mind, and meticulous cleansings, both physical, like sweat lodges or hurler baths, and energetic, like smudging with sacred herbs or visualizations, all undertaken with solemn dedication, unwavering focus, and profound respect, long before the first inhalation of sacred smoke, before the first sip of a psychoactive brew, before the first encounter with the spirit of the plant. This was not born of mere superstition, primitive fear, or empty dogmatic tradition. It stemmed from a profound empirically derived understanding that the mind, the emotional body, and the energetic system must be rendered stable, clear, receptive, and resilient before being intentionally expanded, before being subjected to the potent, often overwhelming, influence of a substance that can throw open the doors of perception wide, for better or for worse. Used with genuine reverence, with a crystal-clear intention born from deep self-reflection, and with adequate multi-level preparation, cannabis is not a mere drug, not a simple recreational substance, not a mere escape mechanism. It is, or can be, a threshold, a sacred doorway into other realms of knowing and being. But doors, by their very nature, lead in both directions. They can open to an illuminating, life-transforming light, to breathtaking landscapes of clarity, interconnectedness, and transcendent understanding. But they can, with the same impartial ease, swing open on their ancient hinges to reveal disorienting, terrifying shadows, to plunge one into labyrinthine corridors of confusion, paranoia, and existential dread, and the most dangerous illusion of all, the one into which so many unwary and unprepared souls fall, is to blindly believe, with a mixture of naivety and arrogance, that you can handle both the dazzling light and the abyssal shadow, when you have not adequately prepared your vessel for either. When you enter that sacred, potent space, with the hubris of one who believes they have everything under control, or with the reckless abandon of one who seeks only sensation without responsibility. It is not a mere coincidence, not a simple statistical anomaly or a quirk of individual brain chemistry, that countless individuals across the globe report unsettling, sometimes deeply disturbing experiences of anxiety, paranoia, intense self-consciousness, derealization, or a peculiar and profoundly unnerving sensation of being watched, judged, or even psychically attacked. When they consume cannabis, especially if they do so without adequate preparation, in a chaotic or unsafe environment, or with a troubled inner state, most will quickly and often defensively dismiss these feelings as the result of a bad strain of cannabis, an incorrect dosage too much too soon, a simple chemical imbalance in the brain, a set and setting issue, or even a sign of personal weakness or latent mental instability. They will seek external explanations, readily available in popular discourse, for an experience that is deeply uncomfortably internal. But what if, just what if, these unsettling moments are not an error of the plant at all? What if they are not a sign that something has gone wrong with the experience or with your mind? What if cannabis, in fact, were fulfilling its ancient and intended function with relentless, almost surgical, effectiveness, to mercilessly strip away the incessant mental noise, the habitual thought patterns, and the comfortable egoic defenses that normally protect you, or rather insulate you from the raw, unfiltered truth of your inner world, to pierce through the comfortable, self-spun veils of illusion with which you cover yourself and navigate your daily life, and to force you, often kicking and screaming, to confront precisely what has been lurking, ignored, repressed, and festering just beneath the surface of your everyday, socially conditioned awareness. Think of the profound wisdom shared by spiritual masters from diverse traditions, like Gurdjieff with his concept of buffers that prevent us from seeing our own mechanicalness, or the Zen sages who speak relentlessly of the need to understand and tame the monkey mind, that incessant internal chatter that jumps from thought to thought without rhyme or reason, fueled by desire and aversion, those untamed, unacknowledged, and often deeply buried aspects of your psyche, the parts of yourself that you have consciously or unconsciously rejected as unacceptable, not me. Those inconvenient truths you have conveniently forgotten because their memory was too painful or too shameful, or simply those vast unexplored territories of your inner landscape that you have never dared to truly look at, with sustained, honest, and compassionate attention. These are not necessarily evil specters or malevolent demonic entities, as some fear-based interpretations might suggest, though they can certainly feel overwhelmingly negative and alien when first encountered. But they are, innegably meant, uncomfortable, often profoundly so. They are not malicious forces actively seeking your perdition, but rather profoundly inconvenient truths about yourself, your past, your unhealed wounds, and your unfulfilled potentials, aspects of your own totality that you have preferred, for reasons of comfort or survival, not to integrate into your conscious self-image. It is the unprocessed grief for a significant loss that you try to bury under layers of busyness and forced positivity. It is the righteous volcanic anger that you swallow down repeatedly to avoid conflict or disapproval, but that continues to burn in your belly like hidden embers, poisoning your joy and your relationships. It is the difficult, unpalatable realities about your life, your choices, or the state of the world that you simply could not bear to fully acknowledge, and so you push them away into the shadows. The plant itself does not generate these shadows, these inner demons. It, with its powerful revelatory capacity, simply illuminates them, brings them forcefully into the light of your awareness, like a high-fidelity amplifier that does not discriminate between the most beautiful symphony and the most jarring, discordant noise. It does not compose the music. It just makes whatever is already playing inside you in the hidden orchestra of your soul deafeningly, unavoidably louder. And for a vast and growing number of people in our stressed, traumatized, and disconnected modern world, what is playing is a cacophonous symphony of unresolved pain, internal conflict, existential angst, unfulfilled longings, and deeply repressed fears. This is the crucial, often whispered about or entirely ignored aspect of the cannabis experience that few are willing to openly and honestly discuss, because it does not align with the easily marketable, feel-good narratives of instant relaxation, chill vibes, creative breakthroughs, and effortless enlightenment that dominate the popular and commercial discourse surrounding the plant. It simply doesn't sell well to admit that a widely available recreational substance can, under certain circumstances, fling open the doors to your own personal hell, forcing you to confront your deepest insecurities and most painful memories. However, if you consult any serious, dedicated spiritual practitioner, any individual who has genuinely walked the arduous, often unglamorous path of authentic self-knowledge and inner transformation, they will affirm without a moment's hesitation that the journey towards true awakening, towards genuine liberation, invariably begins not in some blissful ethereal realm of pure light and angelic visions, but in the underworld of the self. It begins in the stark, often painful, and profoundly uncomfortable territory of radical self-confrontation, in the courageous descent into one's own psychological and emotional depths, to courageously and compassionately face, understand, and integrate whatever resides there, however monstrous or shameful it may initially appear. And cannabis, when approached consciously, with profound respect, clear intention, and adequate preparation, can serve as one of the most effective, direct, and uncompromising tools for this necessary descent for this cathartic and ultimately healing revelation of the hidden self. But this is only true, and this cannot be overemphasized, if you are genuinely ready, only if you are truly willing, with every fiber of your being, to gaze upon your own unmasked face, with all its imperfections, its blemishes, its scars, and its hidden weeping wounds. Only if you possess the courage, the humility and the self-compassion not to turn away in disgust or terror when the mirror of the plant shows you precisely those aspects of yourself that you have spent a lifetime trying to avoid, deny, or project onto others. In the realm of mystical psychology, transpersonal studies, and the perennial wisdom traditions, this moment of raw, unadulterated exposure, this stripping away of all pretense and defense, is considered profoundly sacred. It is not a sign of failure, of pathology, or that something has gone terribly wrong with you or the plant. It is a profound, often challenging but ultimately grace-filled invitation to deeper healing, to greater wholeness, to a more authentic way of being. That superficial anxiety that unfurls in your chest after a few puffs, that disorienting, spiraling sense of exacerbated self-consciousness where every glance from another feels like a judgment, that rising tide of paranoia that makes you question the motives and intentions of everyone around you, even your loved ones. These are not, I repeat, malfunctions of the plant or your mind. This is direct, unmediated feedback. This is your system communicating with you. The system, your entire being, your physical body, your nervous system, your emotional field, your mental constructs, your energetic architecture, your very soul is responding, often with alarm, to a significant and rapid energetic shift, to a sudden alteration in the habitual flow and structure of your consciousness. What is truly happening in those moments is not that you are losing control, though it may certainly feel that way, and that feeling itself can be terrifying if you are deeply attached to the illusion of control. It is that your carefully and often unconsciously constructed mental filters, those psychic barriers and defense mechanisms that normally protect you, or rather insulate you, from the overwhelming, unmanageable totality of both external reality and your own inner vastness, are temporarily breaking down, becoming porous, or even dissolving. Your inner guard dogs, the fiercely loyal protectors of your ego, the sentinels of your conditioned self, are panicking, barking furiously, because the fortress of your carefully constructed, socially approved personality is being breached. Its familiar walls are crumbling, and the unknown, the unpredictable, the repressed, is flooding in. However, our modern secularized and predominantly materialistic culture, with its relentless emphasis on external achievement, instant gratification, the avoidance of all discomfort, and a profound distrust of non-ordinary states of consciousness, is woefully, tragically ill-equipped to guide you, or anyone, through such a profound, potentially transformative and often temporarily destabilizing experience. There is no village shaman present, wise in the ways of plant spirits and the human psyche, to hold the sacred space, to sing the protective and modulating Icaros, to guide you through the visions and the emotional storms. There is no compassionate elder, steeped in the wisdom of generations, to offer words of comfort, context, and orientation, to help you interpret the often symbolic and challenging material emerging from your subconscious. There is no supportive, initiated circle of community members to contain the unfolding process, to offer a safe, non-judgmental, and loving anchor while you navigate the turbulent waters of your inner world. Often you are utterly terrifyingly alone, perhaps in your cluttered bedroom, staring blankly at the ceiling as shadows dance in the periphery of your vision, your heart pounding in your chest like a trapped bird, consumed by the overwhelming and terrifying sensation that you are dissolving, that your familiar sense of self, your very identity, is disintegrating into nothingness. And the truth is, in a very real, albeit usually temporary and symbolic sense, you are dissolving. That is precisely what the plant in its ancient, untamed wisdom often does or attempts to do. It dissolves the artificial constructs, the rigid patterns, the false identifications of the limited self. It burns away like a sacred, purifying fire the meticulously crafted performances, the social masks, the defensive postures of the ego, that personality structure you have painstakingly built up over a lifetime to navigate the world, to gain approval, to avoid pain, and to maintain a sense of control and predictability. If you are not adequately prepared for this stripping away process, if you cling with desperate tenacity to those familiar but ultimately illusory constructs of self, if your identity is rigidly fused with your ego, the experience can indeed feel like a waking nightmare, a descent into madness. Not because the plant is inherently malevolent, or because it wishes you harm, or because you are going crazy, but because the direct, unmediated encounter with your unvarnished, unconditioned self, with the vast, often chaotic and profoundly mysterious nature of your own being, stripped of all its usual defenses and pretenses, is so overwhelmingly, terrifyingly, undeniably real. It shatters the comfortable illusions, and that shattering, while ultimately liberating, can be acutely painful if resisted. Esoteric traditions, from East and West, have long understood this dynamic with profound subtlety. In the often misunderstood literature on psychic self-defense and occult hygiene, luminaries like Dion Fortune, a pioneering British occultist, wrote compellingly, and from direct experience, about how altered states of consciousness, whether induced by plants, ritual, meditation, or other means, can render the etheric body, our subtle energetic field, our auric shell, temporarily porous and highly susceptible. This increased porosity is not inherently negative. It is, in fact, what allows for profound insights, mystical experiences, and connection with subtler realms of reality. However, it also means an increased vulnerability to external energetic interference, to the absorption of thought forms, emotional energies, or even discarnate influences from the environment or other people, especially if one is not psychically strong, well-grounded, and intentionally protected. If your internal world, your personal energetic landscape, is already a battleground of chaos, unresolved turmoil, negative thought patterns, and suppressed emotional energies, cannabis does not magically fix it or bring harmony. It often, as we've said, cranks up the volume on that internal cacophony, inviting every hidden fear, every suppressed emotion, every lurking insecurity, and every parasitic thought form to come to the surface and join the disorienting party. For genuine, deep, and lasting healing to occur, this surfacing, this bringing of the unconscious material into the light of conscious awareness must happen. It is an unavoidable and necessary step in any authentic process of psycho-spiritual integration and growth. But if you consistently run from that emergence, if you try to numb it with more consumption of the same substance or other distractions, if you attempt to suppress what is arising through sheer willpower or by immediately seeking external validation or distraction, the painful and unproductive cycle merely repeats, high after high, experience after experience. Eventually, if this pattern persists, nothing feels sacred anymore. Nothing feels genuinely joyful or peaceful, only noisy, chaotic, confusing, and ultimately profoundly empty. The initial promise of relief or enlightenment transforms into a frustrating and debilitating trap of ever-increasing inner turmoil. It is precisely for this reason, stemming from a deep understanding of these psycho-energetic dynamics, that cannabis, despite its natural origins and its long and complex history of human use, is not automatically or universally safe, especially when approached from a psycho-spiritual perspective that aims for genuine transformation rather than mere recreation or symptom management. It does not possess the inherent ability to magically distinguish between the prepared, resilient soul and the unready, fragile mind. It does not selectively decide, like a wise and discerning gatekeeper, who should be granted illuminating vision and profound healing, and who should remain comfortably or uncomfortably asleep in their existing illusions and defenses. It simply and quite impersonally, like a force of nature, opens the curtain, pulls back the veil. What you choose to do with what is revealed behind that curtain, how you interpret, navigate, and integrate the often overwhelming flood of information, sensation, and emotion that pours forth, is entirely and often frighteningly up to you and heavily dependent on your prior preparation, your inner resources, and the support systems available to you. And herein lies one of such pervasive and dangerous misunderstandings of all, a misconception actively promoted by a naive or profit-driven segment of cannabis culture, the deeply ingrained belief or perhaps wishful thinking that the plant is supposed to make you feel better, to offer an easy, reliable escape into comfort, pleasure, and good vibes, to be a kind of all-purpose psychic analgesic or mood enhancer. That is the insidious, seductive lie, the empty promise of the superficial wellness market, and the recreational drug culture. The profound, challenging, and ultimately more rewarding truth is that it is supposed to make you see, to see yourself, to see reality, to see your patterns, to see your illusions, with a stark, often uncomfortable clarity. The pain, the joy, the confusion, the bliss, the anxiety, the peace, the terror, the ecstasy, all of it, every nuance of the experience, is vital information. It is your spirit, your deepest self, your innate intelligence, urgently, sometimes desperately communicating with you, shouting, "Look here, pay attention to this. This is what you have been ignoring, repressing, denying." This needs your conscious, compassionate attention for you to heal and grow. But because we have been so thoroughly conditioned by a society that fears and pathologizes vulnerability, that shuns genuine introspection, and that promotes the avoidance of all discomfort at virtually any cost, a society that constantly bombards us with messages to seek quick fixes, external solutions, and superficial pleasures, we often label these challenging revelatory moments as bad trips, negative experiences, or signs of our own inadequacy, and we hastily walk away, often shaken and confused, having learned nothing of lasting value, having gained no real insight into our own depths, just another superficial story to tell about how weed made me anxious, or how I freaked out. The reality, however, is that cannabis in most such cases did not make you anxious. It ruthlessly, uncompromisingly showed you the anxiety, the fear, the unresolved trauma that you were already carrying, perhaps unknowingly, perhaps deeply buried within your psyche. It did not invent your discomfort, it merely unveiled it, bringing it from the murky shadows of your unconscious into the stark, often blinding light of your direct awareness. And this uncompromising honesty, this radical inability to lie, to flatter, or to collude with your ego's defenses, makes it one of the most truthful and therefore potentially healing substances you will ever encounter. But honesty, as we all know from human relationships, is not always kind, not always gentle, not always easy to receive. And truth, especially the truth about ourselves, does not always feel good or comfortable. Often it is profoundly unsettling. The plant is an unyielding high-definition mirror, and sometimes the reflection it shows you is not pretty, not what you wanted or expected to see, but perhaps, just perhaps, it is exactly what you desperately needed to see for your own growth, for your healing, for your ultimate liberation from the chains of your own unconscious patterns. One of the greatest and most seductive spiritual traps, a pitfall into which countless well-intentioned seekers have tumbled, is the pervasive tendency to mistake fleeting sensation, however intense or seemingly profound, for enduring truth, for genuine spiritual attainment. And cannabis, perhaps more than almost any other plant or substance known to humanity, with its capacity to rapidly and dramatically alter perception and mood, tempts us powerfully, almost irresistibly, into this very illusion, this glittering mirage of effortless spiritual achievement. You light up, you inhale, and suddenly, within minutes, you feel an expansive openness, a delightful sensation that the rigid boundaries of your everyday self are dissolving, melting away into a larger, more interconnected reality. Thoughts, which moments before may have been mundane, repetitive, or anxious, now seem to acquire a profound, almost oracular depth, a luminous clarity that feels like direct revelation. Music, which you might have heard 1,000 times, becomes infinitely richer, imbued with layers upon layers of previously unnoticed meaning. Each note, each harmony, each silence, seeming to vibrate with a cosmic resonance, speaking directly to your soul. Synchronicities, those uncanny and meaningful coincidences, appear to multiply exponentially, popping up everywhere like cleverly hidden messages from a benevolent, winking universe, a secret code confirming your special status, your unique connection to the grand cosmic drama. The pages of your journal, if you are inclined to write, rapidly fill with torrents of insights, poetic pronouncements, and philosophical revelations that you feel you could never have articulated or even conceived in your ordinary sober state of consciousness. It all feels intensely, overwhelmingly meaningful, deeply mystical, perhaps even like the very pinnacle of spiritual attainment, as if you have finally arrived, as if you have touched the hem of God's garment and been granted a glimpse of ultimate reality. But the crucial, often unasked and deeply uncomfortable question remains, a question that must be faced with radical honesty. if genuine growth is to occur, does any of this fleeting, albeit often beautiful and inspiring, profundity actually transform you at your core? Do these dazzling flashes of insight, these moments of oceanic oneness, these feelings of cosmic significance, fundamentally alter your way of being, your ingrained patterns of thought and behavior, your relationships with yourself and others, once the psychoactive effect of the plant has inevitably passed? Once the chemical symphony in your brain has subsided, the altered state in and of itself can be incredibly dangerously seductive. It masterfully mimics genuine transcendence. It skillfully, almost perfectly, imitates authentic peace, unconditional love, and profound wisdom. But imitation, no matter how convincing, no matter how breathtakingly beautiful, is not and can never be integration. Merely feeling expanded, loved, or enlightened for a few hours is not the same as truly becoming a more whole, loving, and wise human being in the sustained context of your everyday life. Cannabis possesses the uncanny, almost magical ability to create the appearance of spiritual clarity, of profound understanding, of emotional healing, without necessarily providing the arduous, often unglamorous foundational work required to actually achieve, hold, and sustain that clarity, understanding, and healing in the long term. And that is precisely what makes it so potentially dangerous, so subtly treacherous, for the sincere but undiscerning spiritual seeker. Not primarily because it inherently harms the physical body in moderate, conscious use, though chronic abuse, like any abuse, certainly carries physical risks, but because it can subtly, almost imperceptibly, trick the soul, the ego mind, into believing it has arrived at a profound spiritual destination, when it has, in reality, barely begun the journey, or perhaps has only taken a brief, exhilarating, but ultimately unsustainable detour. It can make you feel like you have climbed Mount Everest when you have merely admired a stunning photograph of its peak from the comfort of your armchair. You might start to believe, with a conviction born of intense subjective experience, that you have genuinely evolved, that you have transcended old limitations, that you have reached a new, higher level of consciousness, simply because you experienced something that felt intensely profound, incredibly revelatory, or deeply healing. But true spiritual depth, authentic and lasting transformation, is not measured by the intensity, frequency, or even the perceived profundity of an isolated altered state experience, however spectacular or life-altering it may seem at the time. It is measured rather by what you manage to salvage, to carry back, to integrate from that experience into the often mundane, challenging, and resistant fabric of your daily life, your habitual patterns, your core beliefs, and your interpersonal relationships. And even more importantly, it is measured by how you consistently live, love, work, and interact with the world, with yourself, with others, with nature, with society. When the intoxicating, perception-altering effects of the plant have inevitably faded, when the music stops sounding quite so celestial, when the synchronicities become less obvious, and when the ordinary, often frustrating demands of human existence reassert themselves. Many regular, even daily cannabis users report experiencing, especially in the initial phases of their use or with particular strains or settings, sudden breakthroughs, powerful aha moments, profound realizations about their past traumas or dysfunctional family dynamics, a deep and moving sense of oneness with all life, or an acute, blissful feeling of being completely, effortlessly present in the now. And these experiences, let me be clear, are often undeniably real and subjectively valid as experiences. They are not necessarily mere hallucinations or delusions. They can be genuine, albeit temporary, openings, glimpses into other modes of perception, other dimensions of being, other potentials of the human spirit. The danger, however, the subtle trap, arises when these potent, often emotionally charged, realizations remain suspended in the ether of memory and feeling, like beautiful iridescent soap bubbles that float enchantingly for a while but then inevitably pop, leaving little trace. When they are not anchored to lived reality, not translated into concrete changes in behavior, not applied in practical, measurable ways to one's life, relationships, and responsibilities, they then risk turning into what seasoned esoteric teachers, astute observers of the spiritual path and its pitfalls, refer to as spiritual inflation or ego inflation with spiritual content. This is a dangerous and common phenomenon, a perceptible, sometimes dramatic swelling of the ego, a puffing up of the personality, around a feeling or memory of transformation, insight or specialness, but utterly devoid of the consistent, disciplined, often humbling, and sometimes painful work that actually cultivates, sustains, and embodies genuine spiritual growth and ethical maturity. It is like someone who has had a single powerful dream of flying and then believes they are an accomplished pilot, or someone who has read a book about compassion and then considers themselves a bodhisattva. This phenomenon of spiritual inflation, of mistaking the map for the territory, the experience for the attainment, is what some Hermetic and occult traditions ominously called the false light, or the light of Lucifer, in its original sense of light-bearer, not necessarily demonic, but representing an ungrounded, intellectual or egoic brilliance. These are experiences, insights, or states of being that glitter with the appearance of genuine enlightenment, that dazzle with their intensity and apparent profundity, but are, in reality, only sophisticated mental simulations, elaborate projections of the ego's desire for transcendence, specialness, or escape from its own limitations, without the corresponding transformation of character and behavior. In Kabbalistic mysticism, as alluded to earlier, this can be likened to an overemphasis on the sphere of Hod, intellectual brilliance, glory form, when it becomes tragically divorced from the balancing, grounding, and heart-centered wisdom of Tiferet, beauty, harmony, the integrated self, or the practical, embodied reality of Malkuth, the kingdom, the physical world, action. It glows with the seductive allure of pure, unadulterated gold, but if not properly integrated and balanced, it ultimately crumbles into worthless, insubstantial ash, leaving the seeker more confused and disillusioned than before. You may sincerely believe, with every fiber of your being, that you have seen the true light, that you have been touched by grace, that you have received a direct transmission from the divine. But in reality, without rigorous self-honesty and discernment, you may have only been captivated by your own reflection in the cannabis-polished mirror, a reflection perhaps temporarily beautified, expanded, or made to feel profound by the psychoactive effects. But still, ultimately a reflection of your own mind, your own projections, your own unfulfilled desires. It is no mere coincidence, but a predictable psychological dynamic that many long-term habitual and often uncritical users of cannabis, or any other consciousness-altering substance or practice for that matter, begin to confuse fleeting insight with a stable, achieved identity. They start to wear their past experiences, their profound realizations, like badges of honor, like spiritual credentials, rather than humbly and diligently integrating them into the very fabric of their being, into the way they navigate the complexities of human existence. They begin to sound overtly spiritual, to act as if they are awakened or enlightened, to liberally and often superficially quote philosophers, mystics, and spiritual teachers, frequently taking their words out of context or misunderstanding their deeper import. Yet, upon closer, more honest examination, their fundamental lives, their core patterns of behavior, their emotional reactivity, their relational dynamics, often remain largely unchanged, sometimes even subtly degraded by a kind of spiritual arrogance or passivity. Their ingrained patterns of fear, anger, avoidance, or judgment do not truly shift in a lasting way. Their relationships with loved ones, with colleagues, with the wider world, fail to deepen in genuine empathy, compassion, and responsible action. Their underlying suffering, their existential angst, their core wounds do not truly dissolve or heal. They simply become more poetically articulated, more philosophically justified, more spiritually bypassed. The plant in these unfortunate but all too common instances has tragically, almost perversely, become a mere prop in an elaborate, often unconscious performance of spiritual progress, a subtle form of self-deception rather than a genuine catalyst for authentic, challenging, and lasting transformation. Osho, the controversial but frequently insightful Indian mystic, once wisely and provocatively remarked, "Substances open doors that only silence should open." He was not, I believe, entirely denying their inherent power or their potential utility in certain, highly specific contexts. He was, rather, issuing a crucial, and often unheeded, warning about their potential instability, their tendency to bypass necessary stages of psychological and spiritual development, and the profound danger of forcing entry into realms of consciousness for which one is not adequately prepared, purified and grounded. A door that is forced open prematurely, or without the proper keys of discipline, discernment and humility, does not tend to stay open in a stable, integrated or beneficial way, and the visions, insights or energies it unleashes can severely distort one's perception of reality, one's sense of self, and one's ability to function effectively and ethically in the world, if the mind, the heart and the nervous system are not truly ready, strong and stable enough to receive, process and integrate them without becoming overwhelmed, fragmented or inflated. The high, the altered state, can insidiously, almost imperceptibly, become a pedestal, a self-created ivory tower, from which you look down with a mixture of pity, condescension or even contempt upon others, the unenlightened, the sleepers, the sheeple, who haven't seen what you've seen, who don't understand, who are still caught in the matrix, when in stark, unpalatable reality, nothing of ultimate significance may have been seen with true, integrated clarity, only felt with an intense but ultimately fleeting and ungrounded emotion, or glimpsed through a distorted, ego-filtered lens. The core problem then is not the insight itself, which may indeed contain a grain of truth or a valuable perspective. It is what you do with it, or rather what your ego does with it. Cannabis can absolutely, under the right circumstances, offer a valuable shift in perspective, a different, often more expansive, vantage point from which to view your life, your patterns, your relationships, and the world. But unless that newfound perspective translates through diligent and consistent effort into tangible practice, into concrete, observable changes in how you live, how you relate, how you respond to challenges, how you contribute to the well-being of others, it remains just another form of sophisticated mental stimulation, a spiritual sideshow, an interesting but ultimately inconsequential detour. If it does not fundamentally shift how you show up in moments of conflict or stress, do you become more patient and compassionate, or just more detached and self-righteous? How you courageously and honestly face your own shadow aspects? Or do you use your spiritual insights to bypass them? How you genuinely and practically serve others without expectation of reward or recognition? And how you navigate the inevitable sufferings, losses and disappointments of human life with greater resilience, wisdom and equanimity. Then it has for you tragically become a spiritual distraction, a subtle form of addiction, cleverly disguised as awakening or healing. And that, my friend, is the real, insidious danger, not the plant itself, not the smoke, not the chemistry, but the alluring self-congratulatory and ultimately hollow story you tell yourself, and perhaps others, about what it all means. The high is not the truth. The vision is not the attainment. The experience is not the integration. It is merely a doorway, a pointer, an invitation. But if you choose to stand indefinitely mesmerized in that doorway, mistakenly believing you have arrived at your final destination, you never actually step fully into the room beyond, the room of embodied wisdom and compassionate action. You risk becoming addicted, not necessarily or not only to the substance itself, but to the pervasive, comforting and ego-stroking illusion of unearned progress, of effortless enlightenment. And that particular illusion, that subtle addiction to the feeling of being spiritual without the corresponding practice of being spiritual, is often far harder to detox from, far more deeply entrenched than any purely chemical dependency. This is precisely why traditions possessing true, time-tested spiritual depth, traditions that have guided humanity for millennia towards genuine liberation and wholeness, never ever worshipped the high itself, the altered state for its own sake. They utilized it, when they utilized such tools at all, with extreme caution, reverence and precision, as a pointer, a signpost, a catalyst towards something far deeper, more substantial and more enduring than the fleeting experience itself. They never glorified the vision alone, however spectacular or blissful. They always invariably asked, what does this vision demand of me? What responsibility does this insight confer? How must I change my life, my character, my actions, in light of what has been revealed? Because real, authentic awakening, the kind that transforms a human being from the inside out, is not primarily what happens on the plant. During the intoxicating journey into altered states, it is what unfolds, slowly, patiently, arduously after. It is found in the profound, sober silence that follows the experience, in the quality of awareness and presence one brings to the ordinary moments of life. It is found in the conscious, often difficult choices that emerge from that deeper seeing, choices that may go against ingrained habits or societal expectations. And it is found in the humbling, ego-deflating realization that seeing something once, however clearly, does not equate to truly understanding it in all its depth, much less to fully embodying it in one's being and actions. Cannabis at its best offers access, not arrival. It can open a window, but you still have to do the work of cleaning the glass, looking through it with discerning eyes, and then acting upon what you see. But the world today, our troubled, fragmented, and often desperate world, does not primarily need more fleeting access to altered states, more temporary escapes from reality, more peak experiences for the spiritual tourists. It desperately needs more anchors, more grounded, integrated, and ethically mature individuals who do not just visit the sacred realms in their meditations or their plant journeys, but who courageously, consistently, and compassionately embody that sacredness in their daily lives, in their work, in their relationships, in their engagement with the challenges of our time. Who do not just feel the truth in moments of chemically induced or emotionally charged ecstasy, but who ardently, patiently, and skillfully live it, day in and day out, in the small things as well as the large. Cannabis does not just affect your thinking mind, your intellect, your emotions, and your cognitive processes, the aspects of yourself with which you are most familiar. Its influence, often unacknowledged and poorly understood in our materialistic worldview, extends deeply, powerfully, and sometimes disruptively into the subtle body. This is the invisible, intricate, and multi-layered architecture of your being, the energetic matrix that underlies and informs your physical form and which carries your most ethereal thoughts, your deepest and most nuanced emotions, your most ingrained and often unconscious memories, and the delicate, vibrating, energetic imprints of all your life experiences, including those from past lives or ancestral lineages. According to some traditions, you cannot see this subtle anatomy, with its chakras, energy centers, nadis or meridians, energy channels, and various auric layers or sheaths, koshas in Vedanta, with your physical eyes, just as you cannot see the wind, radio waves, or the Earth's magnetic field. But you can most certainly, especially when your sensitivity is naturally high or temporarily amplified by substances or practices, feel its presence, its currents, its blockages, and its shift. And when the potent spirit of the plant, carried on the vehicle of its chemical constituents, interacts with this delicate and complex energetic field, it does not politely ask for permission. It does not knock gently on the door of your chakras. It often barges in, powerfully and sometimes overwhelmingly, amplifying whatever is already vibrating there, whatever constitutes your current energetic signature, your baseline level of harmony or dissonance. It is for this very reason that, for some individuals, particularly those who are naturally sensitive, psychically open, or who have already done significant work to purify and balance their energetic systems, cannabis can, under the right practices, unlock profound intuition, heighten psychic sensitivity, expand awareness of subtle energies in themselves and their environment, and induce an exquisitely sharp, clear, and joyful sense of presence in the eternal moment. They may feel more connected to nature, to art, to music, to other people, to their own deepest self, to the divine. For others, however, particularly those whose energetic systems are already congested, chaotic, imbalanced, or carrying significant unresolved trauma, it unearths, magnifies, and sometimes unleashes that internal chaos, that stored energetic dissonance, that suppressed emotional pain. This resulting chaos is not random, not an arbitrary bad reaction to the plant. It is, more often than not, the direct, predictable byproduct of stagnant, uncleared, imbalanced, or negatively charged energy that has been residing, often for years or even lifetimes, within their subtle energy system, like toxic sludge in the pipes or discordant notes frozen in the strings of an instrument. Think of your subtle body, your energetic anatomy, as an extraordinarily complex and finely tuned musical instrument, like a rare and precious Stradivarius violin or a grand concert harp. When this instrument is perfectly in tune, meticulously well maintained, regularly cleaned of any dust or residue that might distort its pure sound, and its strings are vibrant and correctly aligned, then cannabis, approached with skill and reverence, can act like the bow of a consummate master musician drawn skillfully and lovingly across its strings. It can draw out the most beautiful resonant tones, the most harmonious and uplifting melodies, the most subtle and profound overtones, and even in moments of deep stillness, the ineffable music of silence, the pure unadulterated vibration of being itself. But when that same incredibly sensitive instrument is dusty, neglected, out of tune, its strings misaligned, damaged, or caked with the residue of past disharmonies, and handled carelessly or ignorantly, then all the plant does, with its powerful amplifying effect, is to magnify the existing discordant noise, the jarring, painful cacophony of its internal imbalances and unresolved tensions. And in that overwhelming, often terrifying inner noise, people frequently and tragically confuse mere intense chaotic stimulation for genuine wisdom, raw energetic discharge for spiritual insight, or emotional abreaction for profound healing. You may feel much more intensely, yes, your senses may be heightened, your emotions amplified, your thoughts racing, but you are not necessarily seeing more clearly, understanding more deeply, or healing more authentically. You are just in essence much louder, and often far more confused and fragmented, inside. And when you're in a sacred space, your subtle energetic temple becomes chronically crowded, cluttered and cacophonous with amplified noise, with unresolved psychic debris, then true clarity, deep peace, authentic connection, and sustainable spiritual growth become an almost impossible aspiration. Traditions that possess a deep, experiential understanding of these subtle energetic dynamics, such as classical yoga with its detailed maps of prana, nadis, and chakras, Chinese medicine and qigong with their focus on qi, meridians, and the balance of yin and yang, Tibetan Bon and Buddhist Vajrayana practices involving Chusolong channels and winds, and many indigenous shamanic traditions, with their sophisticated knowledge of plant spirits and energetic healing, speak frequently and with great emphasis on the paramount importance of energetic hygiene. This is not, as it might sound to the uninitiated modern ear, some obscure New Age mystical concept. It is, in fact, fundamental spiritual self-care, as ancient as humanity itself, and as essential for the well-being, clarity, and resilience of the soul and the subtle body as regular bathing and dental care are for the hygiene and health of the physical body. Practices such as disciplined fasting, which clears not only physical but also energetic toxins, conscious, rhythmic breathwork, pranayama, which purifies and balances the life force, sacred chanting of mantras, divine names, or seed syllables, which attune the vibratory field and clear negative imprints, invigorating exposure to natural elements like cold water or sunlight, which can reset and strengthen the energetic system, heartfelt, focused prayer and meditation, which align the mind and heart with higher frequencies and cultivate inner stillness, and periods of profound silence and retreat from worldly stimulation, which allow the subtle energies to settle, recalibrate, and integrate, are not mere spiritual accessories, quaint cultural customs, or optional extras for those with an abundance of leisure time. They are, or were traditionally understood to be, vital, indispensable clearing, purifying, strengthening, and attuning rituals. They stabilize your overall energetic field, making it less susceptible to disruption. They clear out accumulated psychic and emotional debris, like cleaning the filters of an air conditioning unit. They ensure that when you choose, with conscious intent, to open a potent energetic door with a powerful psychoactive plant, like cannabis, or through any other consciousness-altering practice, you are not stepping into an inner room that is already chaotically cluttered with years, or even lifetimes, of unresolved emotional baggage, negative thought forms, psychic residue from past traumas, and energetic imbalances. You are, instead, entering a relatively clean, clear, and prepared sacred space within yourself. In various contemporary energy healing modalities, such as Reiki, pranic healing, therapeutic touch, and others that work directly with the human energy field, cannabis is sometimes described by practitioners as a significant field disruptor, or an unpredictable amplifier. This is not necessarily because the plant is perceived as inherently bad or evil in all circumstances, but because it creates a very significant, rapid, and often difficult to control surge in overall energetic sensitivity and a temporary loosening of the normal protective boundaries of the auric field. That surge, that sudden opening can indeed, under optimal conditions, and with proper guidance, help an individual access subtle energy, repressed memories, or intuitive perceptions that are normally outside their conscious awareness, potentially facilitating breakthroughs in therapy or self-understanding. But it can also, just as easily, leave the individual feeling unpleasantly porous, psychically undefended, emotionally raw, and highly vulnerable to absorbing negative or chaotic energies from their environment, from other people, or even from non-physical sources, especially if they are not adequately grounded, centered, and psychically protected before, during, and after the experience. Healers and therapists who are not themselves impeccably grounded, clear, and energetically robust often find that their healing sessions or therapeutic interactions become unstable, chaotic, energetically muddled, or even counterproductive if they or their clients have recently used or are under the influence of cannabis. Sensations, both pleasant and unpleasant, might increase dramatically, yes, but their ability to consciously control, direct, modulate, and contain the therapeutic energy and to maintain clear boundaries often significantly decreases, leading to potential burnout, energetic contamination, or unintended negative consequences for both practitioner and client. The same cautionary principle holds true, and perhaps even more so, in advanced intensive forms of spiritual practice, like Kundalini Yoga or certain tantric disciplines, where cannabis, sometimes though not universally, used historically in specific controlled, ritual contexts by highly advanced adepts, under the guidance of a master, is known to have the potential to prematurely or forcefully awaken the dormant, immensely powerful Kundalini energy that is said to lie coiled at the base of the spine. If this awakening occurs before the physical body, the nervous system, the emotional body, and the overall energetic circuitry, nadis and chakras, are adequately purified, strengthened, balanced, and prepared to handle such an intense, transformative influx of cosmic life force, the results can be catastrophic. Initially, you might feel incredibly, almost superhumanly open, electrically charged, blissfully euphoric, as if you were directly plugged into an unlimited source of cosmic power and universal love. Until suddenly, and often without warning, you don't. Until you crash hard. Until you spiral into terrifying states of confusion, uncontrollable anxiety, psychotic-like episodes, debilitating physical pain, or find yourself utterly unable to ground the overwhelming, often terrifying experience in any meaningful, functional, or sustainable way in your daily life. The unleashed energy, without a purified and prepared psychophysical container, can become like a raging fire or a destructive flood, rather than a gentle, life-giving stream. Amazonian shamans, the indigenous healers, and wisdom keepers who have worked intimately and for millennia with an astonishing pharmacopoeia of psychoactive plant medicines, wisely and consistently say that every sacred plant opens you, but every sacred plant also tests you. And cannabis, despite its now widespread recreational use and often trivialized image, is certainly no exception to this fundamental ancient rule. They believe, based on generations of direct, empirical experience, that each psychoactive plant carries, or is animated by, a distinct consciousness, a spirit, a unique energetic frequency, a specific song or teaching. And when that spirit, that intelligence, that energy, enters your being through ingestion, inhalation, or absorption, it begins to communicate with you, to interact with your own consciousness and energetic field. This communication, however, is rarely through spoken language or clear linear intellectual concepts, especially in the initial stages. It is, more often, through raw, unfiltered emotion, through vivid, often symbolic memories and visions, through palpable, energetic sensations in the body, and through a direct, intuitive knowing that bypasses the rational mind. If you, the recipient, are not clean, that is, if your mind is cluttered with incessant noise and negative biases, if your emotional body is burdened with unresolved trauma and repressed feelings, if your spiritual connection is weak or distorted, if your energetic field is congested with blockages and imbalances, then that sacred, subtle communication from the plant spirit becomes scrambled, distorted, amplified through the lens of your own internal residue, your own. Instead of receiving pristine clarity, healing insight, or genuine wisdom, you receive only more confusion, more fear, more projection, often dressed in the deceptive, alluring clothing of profound mystical insight or spiritual revelation. This is precisely why so many people, especially after periods of heavy, unritualized or unconscious cannabis use, report feeling chronically drained, unfocused, mentally foggy, emotionally raw and fragile, or even paranoid and disconnected. It is not necessarily because the plant is inherently depleting or toxic in its essence, though any substance can become so with excessive or inappropriate use. It is more often because they entered into the profound energetic and psychic encounter with the plant unprepared, without any prior internal or external clearing, without proper containment and guidance during the experience, and most importantly, without true reverence, respect, and a clear conscious intention. It is akin, as mentioned before, to plugging a delicate, highly sensitive, and incredibly complex musical instrument into a powerful but distorted amplifier with frayed, faulty wiring and a chaotic power source. The result is not beautiful, harmonious music that uplifts the soul. It is rather jarring, unpleasant, disorienting noise, internal static that frays the nerves and confuses the mind. And the longer you are exposed to that chronic internal static, the more it inevitably wears down your natural sensitivity, your innate clarity, your vital force, and your ability to connect authentically with yourself, with others, and with the deeper currents of life. Cannabis, in its interaction with the human energy body, can be likened to fire interacting with a dry, untended forest. It spreads rapidly. It consumes. It can, under the right conditions, bring forth a brilliant, illuminating light, clearing away dead undergrowth and revealing the landscape with astonishing clarity, even stimulating new growth. But this is only if the forest, your inner space, is already relatively clear, well maintained, and not overly burdened with highly flammable, unprocessed emotional debris. Otherwise, if the forest is full of dead wood, dry leaves, and volatile materials, representing unresolved trauma, repressed emotions, negative thought patterns, the fire just burns indiscriminately, consuming both the useful and the useless, potentially raging out of control, and leaving behind a scarred, desolate, and confused landscape. Without sufficient grounding practices, like connecting with the earth, eating nourishing food, engaging in physical activity, without unwavering clarity of intention, knowing why you are engaging with the plant and what you hope to learn or heal, and without consciously established energetic boundaries and protections, visualizations, prayers, sacred space, what was meant to elevate, enlighten, and heal, can instead begin to fragment, disorient, and even subtly drain your life force. You may find, over time, that you lose your ability to focus easily, that your concentration becomes scattered, that your short-term memory suffers, your willpower, your motivation to engage with challenging but rewarding tasks may wane. You might start living in a persistent mental fog, a kind of hazy, dreamy state that initially feels peaceful, even pleasantly detached from the harsh realities of the world. But underneath that superficial, chemically induced calm, often lies a dull, insidious kind of stagnation, a subtle deadening of your authentic vitality, creativity, and passion for life. And here is the truly subtle, often unrecognized danger. You begin to mislabel that fog as calm. You start to associate the dulling of your authentic sensation, the muting of your genuine emotional range, the dimming of your sharpest awareness, with genuine healing or spiritual peace. But true healing is never numbness. It is the vibrant, courageous return of full, authentic feeling and clarity. True peace is not the absence of feeling, but the ability to be present with all feelings without being overwhelmed by them. Healing is the restoration of personal power, of agency, of the ability to respond consciously and creatively to life, not its indefinite suspension in a nebulous passive limbo. And cannabis, when used chronically, unconsciously, or without keen energetic awareness and proper psycho-spiritual preparation and integration, can temporarily mask underlying imbalances, suppress uncomfortable emotions, and create a false sense of well-being, thereby delaying or even preventing the true, deep, and often challenging work of genuine healing and transformation. So the crucial, unavoidable question you must eventually ask yourself, with unflinching radical honesty, becomes, is my system, my inner temple, truly clean enough, clear enough, strong enough, and prepared enough to receive the potent influx of energy and information that this plant can unleash? Have I meticulously, lovingly prepared my inner sacred space before I presume to invite the powerful ancient spirit of this plant to enter and interact with my consciousness? Because cannabis, let it be said again, does not clean the house for you. It does not magically resolve your traumas, heal your neuroses, or grant you wisdom on a silver platter. It just very powerfully and often quite suddenly turns on all the lights, in every room, in every closet, in every dark corner of your inner mansion. What you ultimately see, the quality of that illumination, the nature of the experience you have, depends entirely, and sometimes terrifyingly, on what was already there, hidden in the shadows of your unprepared, unexamined self, lurking in the neglected cobweb-filled corners of your soul. There was a time in ages past, in cultures that still remembered the sacredness of the earth and its gifts, when cannabis and other such potent plant teachers were approached with an almost palpable solemnity, with a deep sense of awe, respect, and even trepidation. Its use was often reserved for crucial moments in an individual's life, or the life of the community, for rites of passage, for healing ceremonies, for vision quests, for times when the soul was truly ready, meticulously prepared through fasting, prayer, and purification, and sincerely seeking profound connection, guidance, or transformative revelation. Now, in a contrast that could not be more stark, more jarring, more indicative of our collective spiritual amnesia, it is often used simply because the workweek has finally ended, because boredom has insidiously set in, because social anxiety feels overwhelming, or because a momentary chemically induced relief from the pervasive stress and meaninglessness of modern life is desperately sought. This dramatic, almost tragic shift from sacred sacrament to casual commodity, from potent medicine to mere recreational drug, did not happen suddenly, overnight. It was a slow, subtle, insidious decline, a gradual erosion of wisdom, a forgetting of ancient protocols, often cleverly disguised as liberation from outdated superstitions, as progress towards a more enlightened and permissive society, as personal freedom and the right to choose, or as a rebellious rejection of old, supposedly repressive restrictions. What was once deeply intrinsically sacred, charged with numinosity, mystery, and transformative power, became for many merely symbolic, a hollow gesture, an empty ritual devoid of its original spirit and intent. What was once highly intentional, carefully circumscribed, and profoundly purposeful, a deliberate act of spiritual seeking, healing, or communion, became in large part impulsive, casual, habitual, and often unconscious, just another form of consumption in a consumer-driven world. We transitioned, culturally speaking, from a society that, in its wisest expressions, sought to understand and nurture the spirit of the smoker, the consciousness, the intention, the inner state of the individual engaging with the plant, to one that primarily consumes smokers' content, i.e. superficial information, accessories, branding, and lifestyle signifiers associated with cannabis use. And in this unfortunate, largely unexamined process, the plant itself, in its biochemical essence, did not lose its intrinsic power. Its cannabinoids still interact with our endocannabinoid system. Its psychoactive potential remains undiminished. Rather, we as a society, as individuals, simply lost or carelessly discarded our way of holding it, of honoring its sacred potential, of relating to it from a place of deep respect, humility, wisdom, and conscious responsibility. In the Rastafarian tradition, for example, as we have touched upon, cannabis, the holy herb, was not, and for devout practitioners, still is not, something you did alone in your darkened room as a quick, desperate fix to cope with stress, loneliness, or existential angst. It was, and is, meticulously, reverently integrated into communal reasoning sessions, sacred ritual gatherings often lasting for hours, dedicated to deep philosophical inquiry, communal interpretation of scriptures, both biblical and other inspired writings, intense spiritual reflection, and the collective raising of consciousness. The smoke from the chalice, often mixed with sacred herbs and passed in a circle, ascended with a powerful rhythmic nyabingi drumming, with heartfelt improvisational chants and prayers, with the resonant heartbeat of a community united in purpose. It was, and is, conceived as a communal ascent towards higher understanding, towards divine connection, not as a solitary personal escape from the harsh realities of Babylon. The focus was not, and is not, on merely feeling good, getting high, or achieving a pleasant state of intoxication. It was, and is, about earnestly, collectively seeking alignment with Jah, with the divine principle of truth, righteousness and love.